guys, it's Kelly Latevola here, and I am so happy to be back guest designing for Simon Says Stamp. Today we're going to be doing a flower arrangement with a really loose watercolor background. So I'm working on Canson watercolor paper, and I'm going to be using Simon Says Stamp Spring Flowers stamp set, and then also this Sketch Ranunculus. When this set first came out, it was like everywhere, and I totally loved it, and I never had a chance to use it, so I'm really happy to be doing that today. Here you can see I have kind of pre-stamped what I want to do. Whenever I'm doing a flower arrangement, I always stamp it out a ton of times. So I think that I stamped this one out like 4 different times to make sure I liked the arrangement. And I usually do it just on like copy paper, and I do it with distress inks. And the reason I do it with distress inks is twofold. One, because then I can kind of pick my color scheme as I go. But then 2, they clean up super easy, and I'm not left like scrubbing my stamps forever. They just wipe up with a baby wipe, or if you're using the absorber, that all works well. So I didn't mask any of this. I just kind of stamped out the arrangement, and then I went ahead and put my watercolor paper, I taped it down to just a board that I have. I'm going to smush some distress ink onto my Ranger craft mat, and then I'm going to do just some really loose painting. I know that there's a lot of people, like when I first saw people taping down their watercolor paper, I was like, I don't, like, that's extra supplies that I need. I need, painter's tape, I need a board, I have to waste watercolor paper because I have to cut it bigger. And then I learned that it's actually totally worth it. And the reason for me it's totally worth it is it does cut down on the warping. And so it makes it easier for your card panel to adhere flat to the base. But the reason that I really like it is, especially with flower arrangements, sometimes when you start stamping, it starts to get like a little cattywampus, and it isn't exactly straight. When you have cut your piece bigger than what you need for your card, you can trim it off accordingly so that you can start to make it straight. And I'm all about not having to start all over again. So here I'm just basically, I'm using a wide flat brush. I'm rinsing in between colors, and I'm picking up my colors and then just putting them down to where, so if I knew I wanted my ranunculus in the center to be pink, that's where my pink distress ink went. I knew I wanted the 2 spring flowers on the side to be a peachy orange color, so that's where my orange went. And the idea in my head was just kind of like to have the colors that I was already going to use in my Copic coloring just kind of bleed out into the background. And when you're doing watercolors, it always dries softer than how you initially put it on. So when you put these down, it might appear to be very strong, but it'll dry super soft. I did 2 layers of distress ink. I just kept adding color until I was happy with the way that it looked. I suggest you do the same. As far as the edges, I brought in clean, clear water and kind of touched it to where I wanted it to go on the paper, and then brought it into the part that was already colored. So just kind of bloomed out, so I didn't have any weird brushstroke edges. I also did a little bit of spattering of each color around, because basically when I did the, peacock feathers, it splattered automatically, and then I was kind of like, oh, I really kind of like that. So I dried it down. I'm just flicking on clean, clear water to kind of add some bleach spots. This is just going to make the background just a little bit more interesting. And I actually did this twice. You can do this until you're happy with it. Just make sure before you get into the Copic coloring portion of it that you have dried it either with a heat gun or let it dry, air dried sufficiently. So I cut down the panel. This is the completed background, and now we're going to go right into the Copic coloring. Like I said, the idea was to have the background be the same colors as what I wanted the main images to be. But I have to tell you, because it is watercolor and it is loose watercolor, they are going to blend and they're going to mix and they're going to do their thing and they're going to be beautiful. But if you're married to the way you want something to look, like you don't want any peacock feathers in your carved pumpkin, like I have down there on the left-hand side, this probably is not the technique for you. You may want to do something just a little bit more controlled, use less water. I just thought that it was like super pretty, and most of the colors that I choose, just because I like bright bold colors, are going to cover any of those issues that I might be having. And if they don't, I don't mind. If you mind, then you're going to want to be a little bit more controlled and not let your colors blend as much. With the Copic coloring, this ranunculus it's so pretty, but it's a tight job. It really is. You have to use a slow hand, and even I do with all of my practice and coloring and everything. I went really, really slow because the tip of your marker should just barely be touching your paper. You want these lines to be so thin because if you let the highlight disappear, you're going to lose any depth that you're trying to achieve. So if having a light line, using the light pressure and using a very light hand is something that's problematic for you, I would not use 4 colors. I used 4 colors here because I felt like I was comfortable enough to do that. If you are concerned about not having a highlight, then I would leave off one of the colors. I would probably do the I would probably do the RV02, the RV04, and the RV69. That's probably what I would do because I feel like you need that contrast. The 09 and the 04 may be a little too close together to get a really good contrast. Whenever I do my Copic coloring, I work from light to dark and then dark back out to light. That's another thing. I go over mine twice. If you're concerned about how light your hand is and how much ink you're putting down, then you're probably only going to want to go over it once. When I was first starting and I was doing something like this, and I would have to really take my time, I actually would start with my lightest color to lay in my shadows, but then I would go immediately to my darkest color. And it was because I only wanted to have to do it one time. I wanted to know where I was going to put my pen or my marker. So that's why I laid down my shadows in the lightest color to begin with. But then I went right in with the dark because I was concerned about bleeding because I was very heavy-handed, very, very heavy-handed in the beginning. So if you are too, don't feel like, you're never going to be able to get there. You will. It's just going to take practice. So for the orange flowers, I wanted them to be kind of like a peachy orange. So I picked an R as my base and I filled in the entire flower. Later on, I realized that was pretty pointless. Like I really didn't need to do that. But, you kind of don't know unless you try and you learn as you go. So I'm doing the shading from the center because it's more like a side view of this flower. I'm doing the shading from the center out, but you want to make sure that you're shading with the shape of the petals. So on the left-hand side, the petals are turned up toward the center, and on the right-hand side, they're turned up toward the center. Those are 2 different directions. You want to make sure when you're doing your strokes, you're following those directions, whatever is already drawn there for you. And then I'm just going to go and feather those colors out all the way out to my lightest color, which ended up being the YR15. I left the R32 off again because I had it as a base color and then you really couldn't even see it. So I did just show you one of each thing. You'll see that I already colored the other spring flower on the bottom in orange. It was exactly the same situation. For these yellow flowers, you're not going to get, or at least I have never found where you can get a ton of contrast with yellow. It's just one of those like bright sunshiny colors and it doesn't really bode well to do the dark. So when I was doing the yellow flowers, I was really just concentrating on making them a bit bolder so they would stand out from that background. In the distress ink, when I was doing watercoloring, I used mustard seed. And it's a beautiful color, but it is a strong color. Like if you have ever done a watercolor background and you have gotten mustard seed somewhere that you do not want it, you know what I'm talking about because there is no getting rid of that. That is a dominant, distressing color. So I really just worked on kind of enhancing it and making it stand out from there. And the same thing with the little bulbs. I didn't do a ton of shading. I didn't go over them twice. I didn't need to. Because they blended well the first time and I didn't want them to bleed out. Moving on to the leaves for the ranunculus. These are the leaves that are included in that set. I really love mixing kind of 2 different styles. The spring flowers are kind of more dainty, where the sketch ranunculus flowers are a little more, I guess, hardy of a design. And I just think that they work really well together to make kind of an arrangement. And also, I love flowers and all flowers. I'm not, I don't discriminate against my flowers. So I wanted to get them together and make them friends. Basically, for my you saw the green leaves, I just left the contrast in the center. That's where the veins were kind of already drawn. For these other flowers, there's actually a dashed line flower that's drawn in there in between the two. I ignored that. You can choose to make it a 3-flower set by coloring that in. I chose to just do 2. But I like that it's kind of there and adds a little bit of interest to the stamp, as well as adds a little bit of interest to my background. Those are, in that particular set, there is a ton of those dashed lines, which are super cute. You decide whether or not you want to enhance them or ignore them. I wanted to do a little bit of a shadow because I love making my main image pop away from my background. So you saw me hold my marker from the top right, and my light is actually in the top right on my desk, so I can very easily see the shadow that it's cast. So I picked a C3 to lay in all of my shadows, and then I'm going to go back in with a C5 and just add that to wherever it would be the darkest. The shadows would be the darkest. So usually that's going to be anywhere 2 things meet. Anywhere where you have a really weighty object, like the ranunculus in the middle is really weighty. I didn't even bother putting a shadow behind the stems for the little bulb flowers because it wouldn't cast much of a shadow. It really wouldn't, because it's such a wispy little thing. I added some doodles and some highlights with my white gel pen. This is just something that I enjoy doing that makes it mine, gives it a little bit of interest. By all means, you take what you want from this. Make it yours. I also outline all of my images. I enjoy doing that. I feel like it makes my colors pop more. And I've had a lot of people like, oh my gosh, you really outline every single image that's on your card. And yep, folks, I really do. And here's why. Now I've turned it. It's the top right. That's outlined. The bottom left is not. And to me, I can see a clear difference. And I thought that this was a great kind of before and after, because it's a symmetrical piece. So they are exactly the same. Here, I brought out my mini Misty because we're going to do some heat embossing for the sentiment. And after putting in all of that work, there is no way I'm risking stamping on a block. Like, not when I have the mini Misty at my disposal. So I'm using some Versamark after I prepped my surface with my embossing buddy. I'm going to stamp it in Versamark, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss it using white embossing powder from Simon Says Stamp. The reason I picked the white was because I thought it would kind of play off of those white highlights that we put in there. Just, something that would make it a little bit brighter. It is a little difficult to read because it's a busy piece. The way that I choose to fix that is I take a multi-liner or a writing pen, the same one I used to outline it, and then I add in that same drop shadow that I did for the flowers, and then I'll also go back over it with the C1, or the C3, I'm sorry, because it's going to make it darker around there, and it'll help those words to pop up. Even if you're not comfortable with the shadow portion of it, you could just outline that. Be careful not to get on your embossing, because they're alcohol-based and you'll color it. You could always clean it up with rubbing alcohol, though, and a Q-tip. But it'll just make that area darker and help your lettering kind of stand out from the background. Just pop it up a little bit. Here, in order to combat my warping and then just give it a little bit of something extra, I'm mounting my painted panel on some white fun foam, and then I'm going to go ahead and adhere that to my card base. I always use liquid glue for this I shouldn't say always, because I'm sure there's times I haven't, but I haven't had any issues as long as I make sure to get the corners. And then, because no card is complete without shimmer, at least not in my house, I am adding clear Wink of Stella just kind of randomly, on the tips of the petals, or for the ranunculus, I just kind of swirled it around in there. And then that is basically the entire card. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you will give this a try, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.